There is no silence in the warp, only the endless scream of thought and memory, twisted into storms that devour meaning itself. Somewhere within that maelstrom drifts what was once a soul, the faint echo of a life, extinguished by bolter fire, by faith, by fear. It does not rest, it cannot. The Emperor's light does not reach this far, and the tides of madness rise without restraint. Voices whisper in impossible languages, promising sanctuary, power, oblivion, and yet all of them lie. For the warp hungers not for faith or flesh, but for the story a mind once told itself, the story of being alive. To die in the Imperium is to gamble your eternity, for the commoner who perishes nameless. There is only the slow unraveling, consciousness, fading like smoke beneath the weight of unreal tides. For the psyker, for the saint, for the damned, the story is far worse, because in the warp awareness is pain, and the more a soul once believed and the stronger its conviction, the brighter its fire, the longer it takes to be extinguished. That is what awaits beyond the veil, a place where gods are parasites, hope is a mirage, and the only mercy is to be forgotten. If you find yourself drawn into that abyss, traveler of the grimdark, lend your strength to this channel's light. Like, share, and subscribe, not as empty gestures, but as offerings to knowledge itself. For in a universe where ignorance is death, understanding is the only act of rebellion left to us. He had forgotten his name long before the shot found him. It had been spoken once, perhaps in a briefing, hall on some forgotten world where banners of the Astra Militarum still fluttered, where commanders shouted orders beneath the thunder of orbital fire. But now it was gone. All that remained was the weight of the laser gun in his trembling hands, the static hiss of his vox bead, and the taste of promethium drifting on the burning wind. The world around him had collapsed into ruin, not the sudden ruin of bombardment, but the slow, grinding decay that came when men had fought too long in one place. Manufactorum shells lay cracked open like carcasses, their steel ribs glowing faintly red where molten slag still flowed. Above, the sky was not a sky at all, but a shroud of ash and dust that turned every breath into a punishment. He could not see the sun. Perhaps there was no sun left to see. He fell to his knees beside a crater filled with what might once have been comrades. The air smelled of burnt oil, seared flesh, and ozone. His vox emitted only the faintest echoes, whispers layered upon whispers, as if 1,000 dying soldiers were speaking across overlapping channels. Somewhere in that static, he thought he heard his own voice calling for extraction, though he knew no rescue was coming. He looked down at his armor, once the gray-green of the 132nd Vortigern, now blackened and cracked. The imperial aquila etched upon his chest plate was half melted. Its wings curled inward as though even the symbol of the Imperium itself had grown weary of flight. His hands shook. The last pack was empty. He thought of reloading, then realized there was no point. The front was gone. The regiment was gone. For a moment, he thought he saw movement in the mist, the loping gait of something not human, its eyes glinting like coals through the haze. He reached for his combat knife, though he could barely lift his arm. The pain in his chest pulsed with every breath, each heartbeat weaker than the last. When the shape drew closer, it was only smoke, curling into the shape of an enemy that wasn't there. He laughed, though the sound was little more than a rasp. Then the ground shifted beneath him, not physically, but in perception. The air grew thick. The world began to tilt. It was as though gravity had remembered him after forgetting for a time, dragging his spirit downward through layers of unseen weight. He tried to call out on the vox again, but what came from his lips was not sound, only the whisper of breath leaving his body. And then, for the first time, he noticed the silence. Not the silence of battle's end, but a deeper one. A silence that existed beneath sound itself, the kind that waited, patient and infinite. He realized with a strange detachment that his heart had stopped. His lungs still moved, perhaps by habit, but there was nothing to breathe. He was already dead. The thought should have brought terror. Instead, it brought clarity. The smoke ceased to sting his eyes. The heat of the burning manufactorum faded into something distant, irrelevant. He could see more clearly than before, not with sight, but with some inner sense, as if perception itself had widened. The world shimmered at its edges, trembling like a mirage. He looked at his hand and saw light leaking from it. Faint at first, then growing brighter, like sunlight diffused through blood. Threads of pale luminance traced along his veins, flickering through the cracks in his armor. It was beautiful in a way he had never known beauty. Clean, indifferent, infinite. Then he felt the pull. It began as a gentle current, drawing at the edges of thought, tugging him toward something vast and unseen. His mind protested, clinging to what remained of his body, the cold weight of armor, the stink of blood, the dim outline of the battlefield. But the pull strengthened, irresistible. Memory unraveled. Images flashed and bled into one another. A barracks bunk beneath a leaking roof, a comrade laughing over contraband amasec, a child he might have once known. Each image dissolved as soon as it surfaced, consumed by the current that beckoned him onward. The world dimmed into abstraction. For an instant he was aware of both his corpse and himself, as though watching from above. The body lay sprawled upon the cracked soil, eyes open toward the sky that offered no light. Then that too vanished, swallowed by the thickening dark. He fell. There was no sensation of motion, only the impression of descent, of something slipping free from the lattice of reality. The further he fell, the more distant the material world became. He thought of prayers once recited during deployment, the rote invocations to the Emperor that had long since lost their meaning. Now they returned not as words but as echoes of faith without form. The Emperor protects. The phrase repeated itself, distorted, overlapping, a mantra breaking apart under the pressure of infinity. He tried to cling to it, but the current laughed, not with sound but with feeling, in a deep, resonant mockery that rippled through the void. It was as if the warp itself found amusement in his devotion. He wanted to shout, to resist, to demand meaning, but his voice was gone. Even thought was beginning to dissolve. Then came the light again. Not the gentle luminance of his departing spirit, but a violent glare that seared through the darkness like molten glass. It was not warmth, not salvation, but awareness. He could see shapes moving within it, vast silhouettes that shifted like smoke given hunger and form. They were not demons in the way the ecclesiarchy had spoken of them. They were far older, their malice impersonal. They drifted through the void like predators through deep water, each drawn by the faintest vibration of thought. He realized too late that he was the vibration. One of the shapes turned toward him. Its presence was not seen but felt. A pressure behind the eyes, a claw upon the soul. The soldier's instinct screamed. In the absence of flesh, instinct was all he had left, and even that began to fray. The creature did not approach. It unfolded, expanding across dimensions he could not name. Every memory he still possessed trembled under its gaze. He remembered the trenches of Ortega Prime, the endless mud, the way the sky turned green when the atmosphere burned. He remembered the prayer discs etched into his armor, the half-melted sigil of the Imperial Aquila. He remembered trying to believe that the Emperor truly saw him. The thing laughed again, a soundless rupture in reality, and those memories ignited. Like dry parchment, his past burned away, feeding the creature's hunger. For a moment he felt nothing but the raw, unbearable exposure of being seen by something that should not see. Then it passed. The shape moved on, leaving him hollow. He drifted for what might have been seconds or millennia. Time did not exist here, only persistence. He sensed other souls around him, though around was a meaningless word. They whispered to one another, fragments of thought carried by psychic currents. Most were incoherent, some pleading, others cursing, a few simply repeating the same words over and over. A woman's voice prayed for her children. A man recited coordinates for an evacuation that never came. All of them blurred together, forming a chorus of endless confusion. He wanted to speak, to join them, but he had forgotten how. The current shifted again, and he felt something pulling harder, dragging him deeper into the void. The voices grew fainter, replaced by a low hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It resonated within his essence, making what remained of his awareness tremble. He did not know what awaited below, only that resistance was impossible. For a fleeting moment he wondered if this was judgment, if perhaps the Emperor sat somewhere beyond this storm, measuring the worth of those who died in his name. But even that thought dissolved into uncertainty, because if there was judgment, it was not merciful. The warp did not separate the faithful from the heretic. It devoured all with equal appetite. As he descended, he began to notice color, faint, liquid hues moving like smoke in a void of glass. They were not colors he recognized. They seemed to shift each time he tried to define them. They pulsed in rhythm with his fading awareness, as though mocking the last heartbeat he no longer had. The deeper he went, the more the warp seemed to recognize him. Threads of energy coiled around his essence, probing, tasting, learning. It was not a place but a hunger made into geometry, a storm without sky. Every thought he dared form became substance. Every fear turned into shape. He realized that the warp was not chaos imposed upon him. It was chaos mirrored by him. The boundaries between observer and environment had collapsed. He was becoming what he perceived. A sudden clarity cut through the confusion. This was the truth denied by priests and commanders alike. Death was not the end. It was merely the beginning of consumption. Souls were not judged or rewarded. They were recycled, torn apart to feed the psychic ecosystem of gods and monsters. The Emperor's light was not salvation, but containment, a lighthouse built against a storm that could never be calmed. The revelation brought no peace, only horror. Then came the sound. At first it was faint, like static, the residue of broken Vox transmissions. But it grew, layered, resonant, transforming into something almost melodic. It was the sound of thought collapsing into sound, the hum of the warp itself. He felt it pass through him, vibrating his essence until every fragment of what he had been trembled in response. And then he understood. The sound was his name, or what was left of it, not spoken aloud but remembered. It was not enough to save him, but it anchored him for a heartbeat longer, granting him the illusion of self amid the sea. That heartbeat, that single echo of identity, was all that separated him from total erasure. He clung to it, desperate, refusing to let go. The current raged against him. Voices rose like a storm, demanding surrender, promising oblivion. He could feel his essence tearing apart, unraveling into psychic mist. But something, some stubborn fragment of human will, refused to yield. Perhaps it was faith or defiance or the simple instinct to exist. Whatever it was, it burned bright, a spark against the endless dark. The warp screamed, and for the briefest of moments the screaming stopped. He floated in silence again, but this time it was not the silence of death. It was the silence of endurance. He did not know how long it would last. He did not know if he had truly resisted or merely delayed the inevitable. But he existed, and in the warp, existence itself was victory. Somewhere distantly, he sensed motion, a faint light glimmering through the tides, beckoning him onward. Whether it was salvation or deception, he could not tell. But he followed it, because there was nothing else left to follow. And thus began the journey through the sea without light. The light was no light at all. It pulsed like a wound, bleeding brilliance into the void, its edges dissolving into endless shadow. The soldier drifted toward it not through movement, but through intent, though even intent was beginning to lose meaning here. There was no direction in the warp, no distance to measure, no passage of time. Thought and place were one, and the boundaries that once defined reality were devoured long ago by the tides of the Imperium. At first he believed the glow to be salvation, a fragment of the Emperor's light piercing through the storm. The ecclesiarchy had spoken of such things, of souls guided home by the beacon of his will, but the closer he drew, the less it resembled anything divine. The illumination flickered, changed color, pulsed with rhythm like breath. It was alive. And worse, it was aware. He felt it before he saw it. A presence vast and intimate, both near and infinitely far, watching with a hunger that was neither cruel nor kind, merely inevitable. His essence quivered beneath its gaze. It was not one being but many, an amalgam of thought and emotion, rage, longing, despair, ecstasy interwoven like the currents of a great ocean. It did not speak, yet its silence pressed into his mind like fingers through soft clay. He tried to remember what he was. A soldier, yes, a man of the Imperium, a servant of the Emperor of mankind. The words felt hollow now, stripped of context.